Hey everybody, it's Kari Parnan, the Fiveable Bio instructor. I just wanted to make a quick video going over some science-related voting issues today. So first off, the major things I'll be talking about is obviously the pandemic. Number two, climate change, then healthcare, pharmaceuticals, and then federally funded science agencies and what they do. Most of you might be thinking, well, why would a science teacher care so much about voting? And honestly, it's really important for all of us to care about it, regardless of what we teach, what we do, what we're interested in. Okay. As a citizen, I believe that it's important to vote. There are people in our past who fought for it. And tonight, I'm only going to be going over just some science things that I think are important to be thinking about while you make your decision once you're old enough to vote. Okay, so first off, obviously the pandemic. We're in the middle of a pandemic right now, and it's very related to science. And so the question I want to talk about is, well, what if we all had basic science knowledge? And what I mean by that is, what if everyone knew the difference between a virus and bacteria? Okay, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and when we talk about choosing candidates and thinking about who we're electing, it's really important that the common knowledge of what is a virus compared to bacteria? How do we treat viruses versus bacteria? I've had a lot of people talk about, well, can't we just get an antibiotic for this pandemic? And unfortunately, no, we cannot, because antibiotics don't work on viruses. And COVID-19 is caused by a virus. Another thing, just how the human immune system works. The idea of if you've been exposed to something and how long it takes your body to create antibodies, and what happens to secondary immune system when we're hit with the same virus twice. So, and even just the idea of how the human immune system is impacted by mutated viruses. And if viruses change, what will our immune systems do? So I think a lot of these things are really important for everyone to know. Also, just your basics of hygiene and how disease spreads. I think one of the coolest things I've seen out of the pandemic is how well people have made it a habit of washing their hands, and washing their hands frequently and washing it well. I think most people had no idea that you had to wash your hands for 25 to 30 seconds for it to really, really clean them. So I think that's one of the bright sides of what's come out of this. And then finally, just what real science looks like. I know there's a lot of stuff out there where people talk about, they're upset by the fact that information came out and said, maybe masks weren't good and now masks are good. But something to understand is that science is not a cut and simple scientific method where you do it once and you get the answer right away. Real science is a very long process of finding out information, and you realize, okay, we've got to change it up, or something you thought was true is all of a sudden not true. And that's just part of science. It's not mistakes being made. It's just the process of science where you go back to the drawing board, you look at the data, you kind of change how you were doing something, maybe try a different procedure or system or medicine or strategy, right? And so I think that's something that a lot of people don't necessarily understand, that I think with a little bit of science education, they'd be a little bit more forgiving when things change. Okay, climate change is a big one. Obviously, it's more than just temperature, but what if more people trusted science? What if science was something to behold and that we all, respected and believed in? Also, what if we were critical of information? So instead of just disregarding information, looking at it from a critical point of view, I know my AP stats teachers out there would agree that it'd be really important for all of us to be educated on how to not just disregard information. And so just this little picture here to talk about how one thing that climate change can affect is the idea of, if mosquitoes are able to produce in larger number or live for a longer period of time because of the higher temperatures, we might be incidental hosts. And so a whole new types of diseases and vectors that could influence us is a possibility. NASA has a really cool website I would encourage you to check out, where they give tons of information about climate change. They talk about the vital signs of Earth, very similar to how humans, we have vital signs, right? We have heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, everything like that, that kind of just gives us the overall health of our human body. And NASA has come up with the idea of vital signs for the Earth. And I think that's really cool. It has to do with sea levels and the amount of ice sheets that we have, and also CO2 levels. Healthcare, another really big science piece of information there. So we're talking about, how many people in America have preventable diseases, right? And so that kind of ties into education as well, that there's a lot of sickness out there that could be prevented. This graph right here is actually showing the rates of obesity and people who have their BMI over the suggested amount. And so this just is a big look into how a large portion, if you can see in red here, more than 35%, a large portion of a lot of these states have large obesity rates. And so that's going to give you risk factors for lots of different diseases. We've also got the opioid crisis, access to equitable healthcare, rising healthcare costs, long-term care for the elderly. So these are all things to consider when looking at candidates and deciding on who you're going to be voting for, who you're going to be supporting. So looking at these individual and maybe small, maybe, in terms of like the large picture, these don't seem like major issues, but they really are. They really cut to the heart of humans and whether or not we're able to survive. Okay, medicine, another big one. So thinking about, how many millions of Americans rely on life-saving medications every single day. And, when my daughter, for example, had to be prescribed an EpiPen for her allergy, the price had skyrocketed. In 2007, you could get 2 for $94, and now they could cost over $700. And so that gets into a whole other host of issues. But it's important to, ask your local government officials and ask people who are running for office, what will they do to keep those prices down? Because if you are relying on this medicine to literally survive each day, and maybe you lost your health insurance, or even with health insurance, you can't afford it, then obviously that's going to be a big problem. Okay, last slide here for you. We've got so many science-related agencies that rely on federal funding. So I really encourage you to look at each of these, look up what they do. It's pretty shocking the amount of wonderful things they do. Even just from the US Geological Survey, at first glance, you may think it's all about rocks and the earth and maybe even weather, but what they are doing right now is incredible. They've got their hands in climate change. They've got their hands in conservation and helping prevent endangered species and just a whole other host of things. So I encourage you to check these out.